يأتي تحقيق العدالة الاجتماعية.
The realization of the social justice in Egypt, the future, and this is about the improvement of the social policies through a different role that should be played in order to improve the complementarity of the whole society. Therefore, our new which is the investment in Egypt's future, we'll be having Dr. Ghada Wali, Minister of Social Solidarity Egypt, Sir Paul Collier, Professor of Economics and Public Policy, Blavatnik School of Public Policy, Oxford University, United Kingdom. Mr. Fadi Ghandour, founder and vice chairman of Aramex, co-founder and director, MENA Venture Investment, Jordan. Mr. Khalid Abdulla Janahi, chairman of Naseej, Bahrain company. And the moderator will be Carina, Kamel, senior correspondent of Arabiya Business News, United Kingdom. You have the floor.
صباح الخير واهلا بكم في شرم الشيخ. أنا كارينا كامل من قناة العربية، ويسعدني أن أكون معكم اليوم لإدارة هذه الجلسة الهامة حول موضوع الدمج الاجتماعي والشمول الاجتماعي، وهو موضوع يهم كل المصريين ليس فقط المتواجدين هنا معنا في شرم الشيخ. بما أن أحد المتحدثين والعديد من المشاركين لا يتحدثون اللغة العربية، فنحن سندير هذه الجلسة باللغة الإنجليزية، وطبعا خدمة الترجمة الفورية متوفرة لديكم. Good morning and welcome to Egypt and welcome to Sharm el-Sheikh. And it gives me great pleasure to be with you here today to moderate this all-important session on the topic of social inclusion, which is of great importance to millions of Egyptians, not just those fortunate enough to be here with us today. We'll be moderating this session in English. I hope to have time for questions. If you do have questions, please start thinking about them now. You can email them to ask@egyptthefuture.com. I'm hoping someone will get me a tablet where I'll be able to access those questions at some point. And if there is time, we hope to also be able to take some questions from the audience. I'd like to briefly introduce our panel, which I'm sure you're already quite familiar with most of its members. Minister Ghada Wali is currently the Minister of Social Solidarity in Egypt. She's intimately familiar with the topic of social inclusion, having worked in development for more than 2 decades. Sir Paul Collier is a renowned economist who's currently based at Oxford University in the United Kingdom, and many of you will be familiar with his best-selling book, The Bottom Billion, which talks about the challenges faced by emerging economies. Mr. Fadi Ghandour is the founder of Aramex, and he's also the managing partner of Wamda Capital. He's involved with a number of initiatives for marginalized youth in Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. And last but not least is Mr. Khalid Janahi, who is the chairman of Naseej and also the CEO of Dar al-Mal Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, without effective social inclusion, it will not be possible to ensure that the billions in deals announced here this week in Sharm el-Sheikh will actually benefit the millions of Egyptians most in need. Social inclusion has been and remains one of the key issues for Egyptians when it comes to economic development and prosperity. I'd like to begin by addressing the Minister and asking Your Excellency, what is the current administration doing to ensure that this time around everyone benefits from economic growth and not just a privileged few?
Thank you, Carina. This administration and this government is very much committed to social inclusion. It starts with our constitution. Our constitution has very clear responsibilities given to government when it comes to inclusion, to expenditures and increasing expenditures in the areas that are very much related to social inclusion, building human capital, increasing expenditures on health, on education, on training, pensions, and so on and so forth. This administration is very much committed because there is a strong belief that without inclusion, there's no growth. So inclusion is not just good for social justice, which was one of the requests of the revolutions that you have seen in the last few years, but it's also because we do believe that growth without inclusion is not sustainable. So it's in the Constitution, it is in the strategic plans that were presented yesterday by the Minister of Planning, it's also in the sectoral plans, And it is in many programs and policies that this government has already adopted. So when we speak about inclusion, we're not just speaking about social justice, we're speaking about the main ingredients of growth. We have learned the lesson. Egypt has seen growth in 2005, 2006, 2007, but did not have enough inclusion. So not all Egyptians benefited from the fruits of growth. This time around, we're very much aware and we're very, very much keen on including everyone. Geographically, every single part in the country must be included in development, and women, youth, all sectors must focus on inclusion.
I'm going to ask you a bit later in the session to expand on that, and we're going to want a bit more detail from you, but I'd like to also move to Sir Paul. Why does social inclusion make sense from an economic and business viewpoint?
Yeah, it's social inclusion is not just a nice to have, it's a really valuable economic asset for the societies which have it. Most obviously, it's the bedrock of political stability, and political stability drives investment. But more subtly, any society which isn't achieving social inclusion is wasting a lot of its talent. Frustrated, able people stuck at the bottom of society. Let me take as an example my own country and my own experience. My parents lived before social inclusion. They both left school when they were 12. They had frustrated lives, and they ended up poor. I was the first generation where Britain opened up the possibilities for social inclusion. And like many other people, it was a case of a cork out of a bottle. Right? And so, harness all that latent talent.
All righty. Well, Fadi, if I can turn to you now. I know that you have a number of organizations that work with youth empowerment and also venture capital. Talk to me about the role of the private sector in including youth. We have youth unemployment in Egypt above 30% at this point. What role can the private sector play here?
Thank you. Look, when we talk about social inclusion, I think one major excluded sector in society in the development process is the private sector. We need to bring in the private sector into the development process. We have, as private sector, marginalized ourselves, and we were also marginalized by the development system, that we have focused completely on the concept of the business of business is only business, and we are only concerned about only about our profitability as an institute, as companies. And we have completely, I'm generalizing here, we have completely neglected the concept of being part of the development process, even though we are major employers, we have major amounts of capital, we have knowledge, we have capabilities that must be included in some sort of partnerships into the development process. So for me, this session is about not only social inclusion of people on the margins of financial inclusion, but people that are financially included to bring themselves out of that miserable place of being excluded from development and not leaving it only to civil society and government, and make a stand and become part of the development process. We have lots of capabilities, and that's a critical element. I think a major asset in society is absent because the private sector is not thinking of social inclusion in its role beyond the business side of things.
Khalid, I'd like to get your take on a slightly bigger picture, if possible. When we look at the investment strategy overall in Egypt, what can you tell us about the priorities of this kind of an investment strategy? Do you see that there has been a change of course? What do you think needs to be the overall big picture when we look at investment in a way that is pro-poor as well as pro-business?
I want to leave the country tomorrow and come back 3 days from now, so I'm not going to answer that question the way you want it. But let me, before I say that, I want to congratulate the organizers on this session, because a session like this is such an important session. I've been coming to Egypt and I've been coming to the Arab world a lot for meetings, but this meeting, such as this session about social inclusion and bridging the gap, which I don't believe actually time is to talk about bridging the gap, because the gap is so wide in the Arab world as a whole, that bridging, the word bridging is not the right word to use. We got to basically be leaping now and really going a quantum leap to really bring the type of people that Fadi is talking about to the fold. Secondly, actually, as much as I congratulate the organizers for this session to be here, I was looking at the number of the speakers and the moderators from day one until now, until the end of today. There are more than 160 speakers and moderators. That includes the word leaders and everybody else who was here. Out of that, only 14 women out of 106, so less than 9%. So that in itself, I think it's an issue. So a major part where Paul's talking about basically leaving a big part, and that's 50% of the society, we just basically leave them out. And then we're looking at the youth. Nobody below the 25, in terms of the youth, bringing them here and really getting that energy out and listening to this youth, where they are going to go into the future, apart, of course, from our moderator. So we're lucky to have a young person with us here in this thing. So I think that the organizers need to be a bit more careful when they come up with this thing and really include more. Another thing, actually, I want to mention, I think it's important, I would like to congratulate the country with the new constitution. Amro Musa and his gang of 49, him and the other 49, they put a very good constitution. And he was so proud of it, and he should be. And he was mentioning in Davos, this last Davos, that he was so proud that they made sure in the constitution that minimum 25% of the seats in the parliament will be for women. That is wrong. Actually, it should have been a maximum 25% should be for men, because men have got this problem. At least let's give the other part, the 50% to fix it. Now, coming to the issue, I think Fadi touched upon it, and I think it's an important factor, is not just a question of financial inclusion. Actually, it is very much the critical thinking inclusion. We got to bring our young people, to bring them on board, to really let them think outside the board, to create entrepreneurship. We talk about SMEs. SME is not just a question of giving money to somebody who has microfinancing. Okay, you've got a project of doing cakes, for argument's sake, and selling them, or any of these things. It's
Khalid,
much more to bring it out.
But I think that we should give a chance to the minister. You've made your point very well. Thank you. Ghada, would you like to give us your response to that? And also, Khalid mentioned the Constitution, which you also referred to. Perhaps you could just maybe flesh it out for us a little bit. We know that the Constitution does, in fact, guarantee many rights for the disadvantaged and the poor, but maybe you could tell us the actual concrete policies that you've already instituted and that are being implemented today that achieve what is laid out in the Constitution. And obviously you can respond to some of the points that Khalid made.
I think that this government has started by looking at subsidies and how just subsidies are. And we immediately realized that subsidies are going to the richest, that less than, most of it goes to the richest, the highest quintile, and very little goes to the lowest quintile. Right. So the reforms done in energy subsidy and the reforms done in moving from universal subsidy to better targeted subsidies are meant to be more inclusive and to create space and use the money available to reach the poorest. So we have started by improving targeting. And to improve targeting, you really need to look at the income and expenditure of the poor. You need to look at the profile of the poor, and you need to decide and take this policy decision that this government should be supportive of the poorest quintiles and not of the highest quintiles. And this was what provoked the move in the prices of natural gas, for instance, removing subsidies from the highest quintiles to use the money for the poorest. So the policies are to better use subsidies to target the poorest, to go to the underprivileged areas, so move to Upper Egypt more. This is where we want to invest in health and in education, increase those, and we have invested actually in this fiscal year, and there's an 18% growth in the budget on expenditures in health and education. We're also moving to cash transfers to the poorest families, and these cash transfers are given to women because women are capable of really using the money for the family, for better health, for better education with conditionalities. And when it comes to policies, we're looking at a unified registry where you have all Egyptians and where you identify the profile of Egyptians and where you link different databases in different governments so that you can tell who are the poor, what do they get, and you make sure that they receive the resources that are intended to go to the poor and minimize leakage to the more privileged.
But if I could just press you on this point, you're obviously doing a lot, and I think everybody can follow clearly what the ministry has achieved, what is being done in terms of helping poor people. But my question is really more about, are policies that are pro-poor and policies that are making sure to include marginalized people being implemented and being thought of in a separate away from the overall investment strategy, or are we actually crafting a unified way of thinking that doesn't just say, we're going to bring in this company that's going to create a ginormous capital city for billions of dollars, and oh, on the side also, this is how we're going to help poor people. How can we make sure that it's all part of one unified policy and it's not just a box that we're ticking to say, okay, and here's the social inclusion aspect of things?
It's not a box being ticked, definitely. There's a vision for this country. We do need growth, but we need inclusive growth that is job intensive, that creates decent jobs for all, and decent jobs for women and for youth. So when we speak about investments, we want investments that are labor intensive. We want to attract investments that are keen on creating good jobs, decent jobs, providing training and quality jobs for women, for youth, for everybody, and in different places in the country. So it is not a box here or a box there, and there is a social justice committee that includes the Minister of Finance, Minister of Planning, Minister of International Cooperation with the social group. We meet regularly with the purpose of coordinating interventions, with the purpose of discussing social programs and social policies, and there's also this discussion happening at the economic group. And I think the different ministers have reiterated what reflects the vision. For every social policy, it has to be sustainably funded, a source of financing it, and for every economic policy, we look at the mitigation effect, the effect of the poor, how is this going to benefit the poor, and how is this going to include the poor so that everybody benefits.
I want to include questions, and I need a little bit of help with my tablet to be able to access your questions. I know that they're coming thick and fast. I just want to quickly hear from Sir Paul, because I know that you have a lot of global experience in many other parts of the world. Can you just give us briefly some examples of things that you've seen actually work on the ground? And I'm talking here about concrete steps.
Yeah. So, first of all, I think the government is now doing the right thing. But you're quite right that social inclusion needs to be a partnership between government and business. And so business has got to step up to the plate as well. What's government doing? It's learning from best international practice. Mexico, Brazil, very good programs in targeted conditional cash transfers, pulling in, for example, pulling in girls into schools. So the government program can get girls into schools. Business has then got to do its part to make sure that what happens in those schools is actually teaching for employability. And in the past, Egypt didn't do that. Egypt's schools taught for credentials, not for employability. Now, one of the things that Tony Blair introduced in Britain was academy schools in which, in the management boards of the schools, business took part, and it helped shape the curriculum to make sure that those schools achieved employability. That's an example of partnership.
Right.
Can I give you one more example of partnership? This is from Kenya, best practice in the world. Partnering up between a mobile phone company, a bank, and government to create e-banking. You know, only 10% of your population is banked. That is social exclusion, big time. But nearly everybody has a mobile phone. In Kenya, it only took 3 years to go from 0 to everybody with a mobile phone having an e-bank account. You can do that really fast. And that spreads banking to everybody. That's financial inclusion, big time. But it took this partnership, a bank, telecoms, and government. So those are two practical ways in which you can build partnerships in schooling and then in financial inclusion.
Fadi, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the idea of financing for venture capital for young people who have projects and entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is a really key issue. And you know, when we talk about entrepreneurship in the Middle East, it seems as though that sector is really only open to the sort of very privileged few. Those are the entrepreneurs who truly manage to succeed. But if you know, the sort of more disadvantaged youths can also access the entrepreneurship opportunities and the financing, that can also lead to more inclusion. Can you talk to us about how that might be happening?
So let's bring the concept of entrepreneurship down to earth a little bit and not make it the sexy Silicon Valley story. So entrepreneurship is across all sectors, from the bottom of the pyramid, in my view, all the way up to the technology and the savvy technology startups that are happening in the region. So a micro-entrepreneur that is creating a single or two jobs is an entrepreneur. So let's not say that entrepreneurship is that exclusive story of a specific segment of society that is necessarily highly educated and highly skilled and highly capable. Over 90% of businesses in the Arab world, and specifically here in Egypt, are micro businesses. So we need to think about how do we have that inclusion process of people that are not only in micro businesses, but are outside of the formal economy. I mean, these are people that are creating jobs for themselves. So if government is not making jobs available, if the private sector is not making jobs available, if businesses have a difficulty in starting up because there is a cumbersome process in bureaucracy to start up, or there is no access to capital, we should know that people go out and actually create an income for themselves. Let's not forget these majority of waves of people that are shy and afraid to bring themselves out from the cold because they think government will punish them for being included in society as a formal economy people. So once we think about that, then we think about how do we give them access to capital. In Egypt alone, in the Arab world, banks do not know how to give small and medium-sized loans. They don't. They give loans to the rich people and the big names in society, and the small guy that really needs access to finance is not getting access to finance. It's not. And we need to acknowledge that. If we do not acknowledge that, thank you, but if we do not acknowledge that, then we are not addressing the problem. We can talk about mega projects, infrastructure projects, massive blue-collar employment projects, but the reality of the matter, these people are not going to join. They are not ready to join that process. Banks, what can government do with the private sector banks? Give them that security. If banks are timid about giving loans, give them the security. Do loan guarantees where the banks can give the SMEs loans with the government guarantees. Look, let me give you an example.
We're running out of time.
I want to give you one example first. So in microfinance, where we are giving loans to the unloanable and people outside of the formal economy, 98% of these people will pay back. They don't give bank guarantees. They don't have their mother and their father guaranteeing them. They don't have land, and they still pay back. The question is, why are they paying back? And we need to understand and make that more capital like that available so that people can stand up on their feet.
Thank you. I'd like you to comment. I have a really important point, but I'd let you respond briefly, please, because I want to move on to another topic.
Yes, because this government a few weeks ago has just passed the long-awaited for microfinance law, which allows private sector companies to provide credit and which encourages also civil society organizations and NGOs to formally provide credit. We have a large unbanked size of population. Our banks do not penetrate villages. Our banks are not present in all parts of Egypt, so banks are encouraged with a CBE intervention, but companies are allowed today under EFSA regulation to provide credit to the poor. NGOs are encouraged to provide credit to the poor. 2/3 of the size of the industry is provided by NGOs and by private sector companies. We're not just doing that. We do believe that jobs are what helps people become included. So we have a labor-intensive program at the village level. We have looked at health insurance for the poor for inclusion, the national TVET program, the creation of a special ministry for slums upgrading is also for inclusion and for improving the quality of living of the poor, inclusive housing for the poor. So there's a number of measures, and they're all integrated and coordinated.
What I'm going to do now is, because we have just under 15 minutes, I want to make sure we get some questions. I'm going to throw out one more really important topic I think that we should comment on, and I'm going to ask you to perhaps touch on it along with some of the questions that we're going to try to get in there as well. One of the things that keeps coming up in my personal reporting about the Egyptian economy when we look back in the past is the fact that there was an overemphasis on capital-intensive industries as opposed to labor-intensive industries, and that was always seen as one of the reasons why the previous growth wasn't inclusive. Today, we are still seeing an emphasis on capital-intensive industries, and my question is, have we seen a shift? Is there enough of a shift to focus on the labor-intensive industries and the industries that create jobs, and not just an emphasis on mega infrastructure projects? So I'd like you to try to address that in the next comments that you make. I also want to just mention a few of the questions that are being mentioned here today. Someone asked the question, and this is interesting because it puts what we're talking about here in a global perspective, is the Middle East one of the most unequal regions in terms of wealth in the whole world? Be good to know what your thoughts are on that. Is social inclusion still seen as something that we shouldn't really be talking about? Is it getting enough attention in the conversation? And questions, actually this is probably a theme amongst the questions that we're getting here, is people talk a lot about social inclusion and inclusive growth. We heard it from Christine Lagarde on the very first day of this conference. It's something that has been mentioned almost in every session. However, if we could get a sense of what concrete steps have actually been taken. I know, Minister, that you mentioned many of the policies, but perhaps we could get a sense of the tangible concrete steps that are actually helping people in their everyday lives. Shall I allow Mr. Janahi to speak perhaps first, and we'll move this way?
Okay.
But I'd ask you to please be brief because we don't have much time.
I'll be briefer than you. Okay, now. All right, now. Thank you. Okay. I think that the question about the Middle East, Oxfam study shows that in 2017, 1% of the population of the world will have 50% of the wealth of the world, and the 99% will have the other 50%. But when you look at the majority of that, a lot of it actually is in the countries such as the United States and Europe and elsewhere, where truly social inclusion, as Paul said, is already in the real step, is going forward. We are in part of the world where the level of unemployment is the highest anywhere in the world for the youth. We are in the part of the world where the rich is getting much, much richer, not because he's only good, because he's sitting on the lap of the regime and he gets the job and he gets the business. Okay? So that's why he becomes much, much richer than the normal. So when we compete with each other here, we compete how close we are to the regimes, rather than being really good at what we do. Even if we are good at what we do, unfortunately, people look at us that we are not that good. So I think for the past 60 or so years, in this part of the world, the Arab world, that post-colonization, the way the systems, the way the countries have been run, they've been run on an equation which is totally skewed. It's been run on the basis of that security brings stability, stability brings sustainable development. Unfortunately, that does not work. That's why we don't have sustainable development. It's the other way around. Sustainable development brings stability, brings security. So what we have to do, actually, you're right, we have to invest in real things. Egypt alone, Egypt today, needs around 600 billion Egyptian pounds in the next 5 years to what I would say creating a sustainable development process, a path. Yes, I agree with Fadi. I forgot his name. I agree with Fadi with regards to that you cannot have all these big projects. I mean, we've been hearing about these big projects here. I mean, how much of the money which has been spoken about the past 2 days is truly for sustainable development? Unfortunately, I don't think that much. I think majority of it is actually for security, and security, buying security, rather than really talking about sustainable development. Sustainable development means that we have to think long-term. That means you, all of us sitting here, who are part of the establishment, we have to pay a price to make sure inclusion happens. Inclusion will not happen for us just to talk about it. We have to do it. We have to pay a price.
Sir Paul, can I just ask you, there needs to be a balance between the security concerns and the security priorities, as well as social inclusion. Where has that been successful? Can we draw on any examples globally?
Look, social inclusion is the security priority. Any society which has the top dominated by privilege instead of innovation, and the bottom dominated by able people who are frustrated in their effort to access their potential, that is a powder keg. And so breaking social exclusion and breaking the privilege of the wealthy, that is the core security strategy. Now, you're quite right that in doing that, you've got to shift the weight of emphasis from capital onto employment. And the private sector has got to be central to that, because the employment that matters is not the old game of jobs in the public sector. It's getting people to pass from schooling into employment. international role model.
Which goes
here.
back to skills and education as well, which is sort of the root of the problem. Fadi, you wanted to make a quick point, because I want to take questions from the audience.
So the point that I want to make is how do we bring in, we need to bring in the private sector, because it's another security asset that is neutral really now. We need to move from that dependency mentality on aid, because it's really terrible to have an aid mentality, and bring in massive assets that are not participating in society. And I think...
How?
I think you need to institutionally include the private sector in the development process, specifically in several areas. One of them is investing in small and medium-sized businesses and venture capital. Another one, including the private sector in the education system and in deciding what we teach our kids, because if you want us to be employers, you'd better ask us what jobs we're looking for. Because if you don't ask us and then don't tell us that these people are only employable in the public sector. If the public sector doesn't want to employ, then include us in the process, because we will tell you exactly what we need, and then we go backwards. We build skills backwards.
I'd like to take a question from the audience. I know there's a number of you who are waiting. Number 3 over there, is that a question there? Please identify yourself and keep it brief.
I will. My name is Mohammed Rizk. I'm the chairman of Riscos and Foods from the U.S. I think my question to the panel, and also a suggestion, if I may, will be very brief. We have a program in the U.S. run by the SBA, which is the Small Business Administration. This program targets entrepreneurs, and they remove the obstacle for allowing them to get funding from banks. We don't have public banks in the U.S. But by issuing a certificate for 98% and sometimes up to 100% of the project. Well, I see here today a different government than the government I have seen, or administration I have seen in Egypt before. So I think you guys think outside the box a little bit. This aid program that can benefit over 8 million unemployed people here in Egypt, in addition to 800,000 that they get out of school every year. One last thing for that program, the SBA direct that entrepreneur to one of the colleges in the U.S. to be able to get the feasibility study and the business plan. And at the same time, the government will give incentive to that university to give that service to that entrepreneur for free. However, the U.S. economy, guys, is based on small businesses, not big corporations. That's what you need to do in Egypt.
Thank you for your comments. I'm going to take 2 more, and then I'll give everybody a chance to respond. 6 all the way in the back, please.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Halal Sakari, and I know Ghada Wali, so thank you. My comment is, it's actually a comment, and the comment is that basically when we take a look at social inclusion, it's not just about, you've touched on a number of things, but at the end of the day, it is about addressing the needs of the citizen so that they have the skill sets, they have the capability, they have the housing, they have the electricity, they have water. Basically, the national state is addressing the needs of the individuals so they're able to contribute back to society. And at the same time, that actually leads to national security, state security.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any actual questions? Number 4, is that a question? Is that a question or a comment? We want some actual questions, please. Thank you.
An actual question? I'm David Swingler, chairman of the GDG Theme Park Design Company. We have projects, mega projects, which are labor intensive. Theme parks, Egyptology theme parks that are going to create 50,000 direct jobs and attract world international tourism of about 10 million additional tourists a year. Ministry of Tourism here says that every 1 million additional tourists creates about 100,000 jobs across Egypt nationwide. So bringing in 10 million tourists, we're going to be creating about 1 million jobs. Considering social inclusion, we would like very much to know how can we coordinate our efforts and what we're doing in order to enhance these million jobs.
We get the point. Thank you so much. So we have 5 minutes exactly. So I think that's a really good question, Minister. How can companies be included in your initiatives and in your plans? And also, if we can perhaps address also the comment that the gentleman made about some of the programs that we've seen in other countries and how we might be able to draw lessons from them here.
The SBA of the United States has an integrated program. It provides education on entrepreneurship, and this is very much needed in schools and universities in Egypt. It also provides guarantees and guarantee mechanisms, and this was discussed in the previous session, and we do have a need for more guarantees. There is the Social Fund for Development, which provides credit to SMEs. A number of banks have been doing reasonably well in providing credit to small and micro with incentives from CBE. We still need to do much more when it comes to access to finance. We hope that the microfinance law will help with that. I would like to also comment on the idea of talking about it. We have walked the talk. We have started programs which respond to the comment at the very end of the hall by Hala Sokkari. We have started to work in a number of the poorest villages. Around 250 villages are seeing improvements in infrastructure so that there is higher mobility and there is a better quality of life. We have seen also a program being launched when it comes to labor-intensive programs by the Social Fund in the 15 poorest governorates of Egypt. We have the slum upgrading program, which is labor-intensive because the construction sector is labor-intensive and it creates a lot of jobs. So then the programs that are being designed, that are being implemented, that are being encouraged by this government are labor-intensive in nature. It's not just access to finance, it's access to equal opportunity. And we do believe for people to have access to equal opportunity, they need to have we need to have more investments in human capital, access to information, and political participation. We have launched a program to train youth on political participation because we are going to have local government elections soon with 50,000 seats, and 25% of those should go to youth. So we are training 40,000 youth to be active politically and be trained on political participation. So we need access to finance, but also we need access to good education, to relevant education. We need access to health services, especially to women. We need access to reproductive health services, and we're working on that.
I have to apologize for the brevity of this session, but we're waiting to hear from the president later, so that's why we're a bit tight for time. I just want to ask everybody a final question, and I'll start with you, Khalid. A lot has been made throughout the course of this event about how the plans are good, the intention is good, the political will is certainly there. But really, the key is going to be in implementation and carrying things forward. How optimistic are you that that's actually going to happen?
Well, I wouldn't be here if I was not optimistic. The two of us, 12 years ago, we started walking on the road with other people from something called Arab Business Council. And we went to the Arab capitals and meeting governments and talking precisely about what we're talking about now. Fadi, actually, what he's talking about today, what I'm talking about, we've been saying it for such a long time. The problem is when our mentality is based on the following. When I hear a top businessman, a top businessman of the Arab world in Davos, which is sitting in front of these top people in the world saying that what are we going to do with human rights? Human rights is not important. The important thing is that this person in Egypt, in Upper Egypt, he wants electricity in his house. That, for me, I'm sorry to say, that type of person, that type of attitude will not get us what we're talking about social inclusion. We got to be thinking to start with that the human rights, as the minister said, we're all born equal. We should all be given the same equal opportunities, and we should. It's a question of meritocracy. The word meritocracy does not exist in the Arab world. We need to start with meritocracy, and that's the way we're going to have social inclusion that the gentleman was talking about.
We're basically out of time, but I want to hear from you all briefly. Fadi, please go ahead.
So I'm optimistic. I am. I think we're repeating. I mean, I'm optimistic. Everyone here is optimistic. There is a sense of optimism in this conference. It's fantastic to see the amazing show up and the support for Egypt. Egypt carries the rest of the Arab world. We need you to stand on your feet, and we're going to help you do that so that you pull us all into the safe harbor that we need.
Sir Paul, I know that you were involved in economic discussions in Egypt pre-2011. Do you see that the situation is different now? How does it look to you?
I've come to Egypt now because I think this is a really exciting moment. It's a privilege to be here. Egypt is the society that's too big to fail and has too much potential to continue in a frustration of growth and inclusion. Let me just say, a really good model for getting employability into youth is Germany. And the way Germany's done it is this combination of getting firms into schools, and then really expanding apprenticeships and internships. That's the way to go. The government is moving now on its responsibilities. You heard the minister, she's opening up conditional cash transfers to get kids into schools. The government is now doing the right things. It's moving from the politics of very old-fashioned, very inefficient attempts at social inclusion to modern best practice. Now it's your turn.
And if, Minister, I'll let you have the final word. If I could just frame the question, we have seen mega deals being announced this weekend. It seems to be that a large portion of them, if not a majority of them, are in the energy sector. Are you hopeful that we're also going to get more investment in the other sectors like agriculture and education and healthcare? If we sat here 12 months from now, how will things look to you?
I think investments and deals being made are not just in the energy sector, they are in different sectors. And the next session you will be hearing about the deals, and we'll be hearing about the different investments that have been made. We have said a number of times that this conference is a beginning and it's not the end. So the investments being made here are not all the investments being made or all the programs we are working on. And to go back to your question about being optimistic, we are optimistic in this government because we believe in the people of Egypt, but we know there are challenges. We're very much aware of the challenges. There are institutional challenges. There are capacity challenges within the ranks of government that we are working on. We are optimistic because we believe the future is Egypt, and Egypt is the future. We cannot fail, and we are not going to fail. This time around, we know what needs to be done.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you very much to my distinguished panel, and thank you all for being so patient with us. And I apologize once again for the brevity, but we are sticking to a very tight schedule because we will be hearing from the President later. Thank you all so much for your time and for your comments. Thank you.